Hi everyone, welcome to Smart City Institute Japan's webinar series called Global Perspectives on Smart Cities. I'm your host, Tak Nagumo, Executive Managing Director of Smart City Institute Japan. So today we'll have a guest speaker from FIWARE Foundation in Europe. And about a year ago, we had a webinar on FIWARE with the Mochizuki-san as a guest speaker, and he's now watching this video today. And today we have CEOs of the FIWARE Foundation directly talking to us. We are very lucky to welcome Mr. Ulrich Ahle. So Ulrich, welcome.
Yeah, very good evening. Hello to Japan from Europe.
Thank you very much. And we are very delighted and honored to have you today, because the FIWARE community in Japan has been steadily growing. And interestingly, not only the cities using FIWAREs, those supporters, government officials, and also cities themselves are connected because of the FIWARE. So we as a Smart City Institute Japan have been working with Code for Japan, both are a member of the FIWARE Foundation, and also the cities are now using FIWARE. The one cities started to use FIWARE, and then knowledge has been transferred to other cities, so that Kakogawa City and then the Hamamatsu City are both talking about the use of FIWARE. So interesting phenomenon has been growing right now. So really lucky to have you today and directly hear from you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, as I said, thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar today, and I would have loved to be on site in Japan. I've been before Corona, I think 2 or 3 times in Japan, in Tokyo, but also in Osaka, in Kyoto. I've visited 2 times the Smart City Expo in Kyoto years ago, looking from now backwards. And I'm really excited about the adoption of open source technology, of open standards when digitizing also cities in Japan. And here FIWARE puts a little bit of contribution of technology into this endeavor to support the people living in the cities and to support the people who are responsible for the operation of a city.
Thank you very much. So next time you come back to Japan, I would love to take you to both for those important spots in Japan and people in Japan, so we can even grow the community bigger. And for viewers, just a little housekeeping matter. Right now, we'll hand over the microphone to Ulrich for his presentation. And all viewers are welcome to make comments, questions, messages through the chat box. And when you write the messages, please choose all and the pull down menu so that all the writings can be shared amongst the participants. After Ulrich's presentation, we'll have a discussion time and involve those writings from the viewers. Okay. All right. So Ulrich, your show time.
Okay. As I said before, thank you very much. Again, I would like to give you an overview of open source technologies, but also global standards for smart cities of the future. It is mainly FIWARE technology, but also other standards, other partnerships, which are getting more and more an important role in handling our data, handling context information, which are describing what is happening around us, where, when, and why. And we are using this data to, on the one side, improve the quality of life of citizens living in a city or also in a rural area. So this digitization is not only relevant for people living in urban areas, in cities, it is also relevant for people living in rural areas. Like myself, I'm living in a small village with 2,000 people living there. So it's really a small village, but we are driving a lot of digital activities within our village, and digitization is important for all of us, independent where we are living. And to be able to support and to use these digital solutions, it is important to get access to the data. But today, these data are still very often organized in silos. In silos because interfaces are not open, data models don't fit to each other, or because there is not enough trust in the ability, in the option to share data, to provide data to others. This is what we call data sovereignty. And this data sovereignty is a prerequisite for a real data economy, besides all the technical things of interfaces and data models and the question, should it be open source or should it be commercial software or closed source? It is important to break down these data silos. And this is one of the core missions of FIWARE, to break down the data silos. And as it is described here on the left side, to capture data, context information from the real world, to represent it in a digital twin, so a digital representation of the real world, and then to use functionalities like artificial intelligence, like big data analytics, to process, to analyze, and to monitor this data. With this, to update the data again in the digital twin, and then to provide out of the digital twin data back to the real world, or where possible, to actuate even out of the digital twin into the real world. So an autonomously driving car is simply a car which is operated in the digital twin, in the digital representation of the real world, but it is driving physically in the real world. So it is actuated out of the digital twin in the real world. So now the question, what is FIWARE? We are talking about open source. So software which is available for everyone for free forever, with a big community behind it. And as FIWARE, we are providing a framework of open source platform components. So this word components is very important. It means we are not providing complete products as FIWARE Foundation. We are just providing components. You can compare it to Lego stones, and I'm pretty sure that Lego stones are also familiar in Japan. So these little plastic building blocks which can be used to create buildings, cars, and so on. And all of these building blocks, these Lego stones, fit together because all have the same interfaces. Yeah? And this is similar to FIWARE. So the first thing we are providing as a FIWARE Foundation are open source software. Out of these components, and we call these components generic enablers, the FIWARE Context Broker is the most important one. You can see here on the left side a very simplified architecture of a FIWARE-based solution with the context broker in the center. Then at the bottom, interfaces to get access to the data coming from different sources. And on top, functionalities to process, analyze, and visualize this data. So that's the first component delivered by the FIWARE Foundation. The second one is a standard interface, a standard API, how it is called, to break down these data silos. And this interface, which was developed over the years in the FIWARE ecosystem, became a de facto standard in some countries in Europe first, and then even became a formal standard. This is called NGSI, Next Generation Service Interface. So important from this page to remember FIWARE Context Broker as the core software component and NGSI as the standard API. And besides the context broker, there are a lot of other software components which can be used to create user interfaces, to do data visualization, to do big data analytics, to do video and image multimedia analytics and processing, to support electronic workflows and so on. And all these components are used either by end users directly or by partners out of our ecosystem, like NEC in Japan is one, to create smart city platforms and smart solutions on top of it for smart parking, smart waste management, smart lighting, and so on. And all these components are used to, as I said, create these platforms. And here you can see a more detailed reference architecture of FIWARE for smart cities. By the way, FIWARE is not only used in cities, that's the core domain, but it is also used in farming, in energy, in water management, and also in industry, so in Industry 4.0. But my focus today will be here on smart cities. And in this more detailed reference architecture, you can find again the context broker in the center, this NGSI-based interfaces to get access to data wherever they are coming from cameras, from sensors deployed in an Internet of Things network, from drones, from other IT systems, for example, also from SAP, which is also another quite famous European software company, but also from social media, at least when they are accessible. We experienced worldwide yesterday some problems with Facebook and WhatsApp, but these are also important sources for information describing what is happening around us. So Facebook, Twitter are relevant informations. And also first vertical smart solutions which are already installed in different cities. Managed by the context broker, and then artificial intelligence, big data analytics, workflow management, and so on, and open data portals which are providing access to all the data which are handled in such a system. So that's the reference architecture of FIWARE for smart cities. And that's the third deliverable of the FIWARE Foundation. So we had software building blocks, we had standard interfaces, and the third element is software reference architectures. And talking about the global adoption of these technologies, we have the situation that the FIWARE context broker has been elected by all European member states to become a standard software building block, which is now promoted and supported by the European Commission to the member states to be used when creating digital solutions. It is in a program called Connecting Europe Facility. And this program has the target to create the digital single market of the European Union. There were some deliverable or some building blocks before from other sources. For example, all national ID cards in the different European countries are using eID. And in this range, we see now the FIWARE context broker. And on the right side, I mentioned before, the standard API NGSI became a de facto standard. And since a bit more than 2 years, it is even a formal standard, at least in Europe, standardized by ETSI, which is a European standardization organization. And they made NGSI with the enhancement of LD, so for linked data principles, a formal standard for context information management for interfaces in smart cities. And this is not only adopted now in Europe, but also globally. And I will come to some examples a bit later in my presentation. So with NGSI, we are answering the question how to break down these data silos. And there's still the question which data to be exchanged. And this is part of a program which initially started 3 years ago at the Smart City Expo World Congress in Barcelona. as the so-called Frontrunner Smart Cities program, with the ambition to define common data models. So by which data and attributes, for example, is a smart parking solution described in a way that a car which is driving in Tokyo can exactly use the same applications and data when driving in Osaka, for example, because all are using the same data models, not only the same APIs, the same interfaces, but also the same data models. And this was originally started by FIWARE and an organization called TM Forum, which is a global organization of telco and IT companies, together with initial 10 cities, 8 from Europe, plus La Plata from Argentina, and Montevideo, which is the capital of Uruguay in South America. These 10 were the initial frontrunner smart cities. And out of this, in the meantime, a global organization has been created. So this logo is a bit difficult to identify, but it is the Open and Agile Smart Cities Organization, OASC, which joined this initiative back in June of this year. And earlier this year, also an organization from India, and I will come to that as an example, the India Urban Data Exchange initiative. So again, we have standard software building blocks here on the left side. We have standard API on the right side, and also common and standard data models to enable interoperability and replicability of solutions created for cities. And this technology is used in the digital transformation journey of cities, in the meantime, globally. And a lot of cities have already certain smart solutions installed, intelligent solutions installed, but very often they are organized as silos, having their given frame, managing their data just within this application. And the way we are recommending to cities is, in a next step, to make a decision for a common governance system, for a common platform. And this can be a decision for a commercial platform, so for a closed source solution. It also works, and there are very good solutions in the market also for smart cities, but it can also be a decision to go for an open source based technology. And in the open source world, in the meantime, FIWARE is the global choice #1 when coming to smart cities. Second step is really to adopt to the standard data models. Third step is something we call the management of right-time open data. So we are not always talking about the approach managing real-time data in a city. Right-time means, to give you 2 examples, to know where the bus is actually, or one of the hundreds of buses are actually within the city. It is sufficient to have this information, let's say, every 2 seconds. This is sufficient to allow me to go to the bus station really right in time when the bus is arriving. But the question whether a traffic light shows green or red, and if I'm using this to manage the traffic flow, I should have this information each 100 milliseconds, for example. But I do not need every information every 10 milliseconds, which would be close to real time. And here it is the approach to have the right information at the right time in the right place. And finally, once a city has been successful in creating its smart city platform, to allow also third parties to use this platform and to provide access to their data via the smart city platform, and also to enable them to earn money with their data. Because open data does not mean automatically that this data are free of charge. Very often data have a value, and the organization, the company, the person who has created this value should have a right to get a certain payback for the effort to create this data. And this is something which can be enabled via a smart city platform enabling the data economy. So this is typically a journey which takes between 3 to 5 years, depending on the agility, on the competences and capacities of a given city. So I've been talking about the 4 main components which are provided by the FIWARE Foundation. Again, open source software building blocks, standard interfaces, reference architectures, and the 4th one were the standard data models. These are the 4 main deliverables, and they are used by either by end users or by partners out of our ecosystem to create powered by FIWARE platforms and solutions on top of these platforms. Some even create FIWARE-ready hardware devices where FIWARE is embedded as embedded software in these hardware devices, or providing services, training, coaching, consulting, system integration to help end users to get FIWARE solutions installed and to use them. And I would like to give you some examples of such solutions and platforms. Let me start with some platforms. There are 12, 13 platforms in the meantime available on the FIWARE marketplace, which can be used by end users. So, for example, this one is from Atos, the urban data platform. And in a similar approach, we have the solution from NEC from Japan, which is called the Cloud City Operations Center, or the newer name, the NEC Urban OS, the NEC Urban Operating System. And NEC started to be successful with the implementation of such solutions in Europe with their European organizations. So, for example, in Bristol in England, in Santander in Spain, in Lisbon in Portugal, in Greenwich in England. And in the meantime, there are the first 10, 12 also Japanese cities who are creating their smart city, their digitization using FIWARE technology, provided in that case from NEC, but also from other partners in Japan. But here clearly NEC is a very important part in our global ecosystem. And I will come back to an example a bit later showing this also. Then we have
okay. Das habe ich online zu Hennessy
let me just check what Siri is doing here with me. Give me a second, please. So I've been able to stop it. Let me now show you on top of such platforms. And again, all platforms, all solutions are using the same APIs, the same data models, so they fit together like Lego stones and can be put together. Here is a smart parking solution. This solution is using the image recognition capabilities of FIWARE. Cameras are installed at streetlights and identifying via image recognition whether a parking lot is occupied or not, providing this information to an app or directly into the navigation system in the car and guiding the driver not to her target address, but to the closest free parking lot, which eliminates a lot of traffic searching for free parking lots. And we have cities in Europe. You know, in Europe, we have a lot of on-street parking, where in the city center, up to 30% of the traffic is traffic searching for free parking lots. And this can be dramatically reduced by such solutions. Another example is from the Netherlands. That's the mayor from a city in the Netherlands called Eindhoven, and a safe city with the exception of one street. And there he had a problem. This street is called Stratum signed. It looks like this, just 1 kilometer long, 55 bars in non-corona times, 20,000 visitors, a lot of alcohol, a high crime rate in the past. And what they did is they installed cameras. And you know, different to partly Japan or much different than in China, for example, we have very high data protection rules. You might have heard of GDPR, the General Data Protection Rules in Europe. And it is not allowed to do face recognition, for example, in streets. And therefore, these cameras do not do any face recognition. They are just analyzing the moving patterns of the people. Second, microphones, 3D microphones, which do sound analytics. Again, not speech recognition, no personalized data. And the third one is social media analytics. Publicly published information with relation to this street, which are publicly accessible, and putting this information together, this context information describing what's happening in the street, combining or comparing it with historical data, using artificial intelligence, the system is able not only to identify critical situations in the street, but to predict them. So the police officer in the control room gets an information. Within the next 3 minutes, it will become critical in that part of the street. And he has now two options. He can either send proactively police people there, or can increase the level of light in this segment of the street. Eindhoven is also the headquarter of Philips. Maybe Philips is also known in Japan as producer of lights and bulbs and so on. And the police officer is able to increase the level of light. And in more than 80% of the cases, it is sufficient to increase the level of light to de-escalate an upcoming critical situation. And it is proven that the crime rate has been reduced by 50% within the street, that the damages in the bars have been reduced, that there are less transportations to hospital, that the police people are utilized more efficiently, and that the image of the street and of the whole city has been increased. So a quite simple example how context information describing what's happening around us can be used for intelligent and smart solutions. Another example, in this case from South America, from the Intendencia de Montevideo, so the city of Montevideo. They have started to install a LoRaWAN, to install sensors measuring the water levels, connecting the floodgates and so on. And they did it because they quite often had situations and still have situations in the city based on heavy rainfalls in the backlands, creating flooding situations, as we can see here on this picture on the top right. And what they did is they used this sensor data I mentioned before, enhanced it by soil hydrological and meteorological models, means a weather forecast. They have sensors in the soil analyzing how much water consumption is there within the soil, and what they call hyperlocal data from the citizen apps, from Twitter, again, from Facebook, and using all this information to create prediction models. And the apps which are used by the people in Montevideo, they are intelligent apps. The apps, for example, are learning where have I parked my car, and I get an early personalized alert. For example, within the next 20 minutes, with a probability of 90%, there will be 1 meter of water at the place where your car is actually parked. So better remove it to another location which is on a higher level. And this is happening in Montevideo in South America. So I'm before Corona, I've been, I think, 3 times in Argentina and Uruguay, and I'm really excited about what's going on in Uruguay, especially in Uruguay. Yeah, and the last example, going more into rural areas. So as I said at the beginning, digitization is not only for people living in urban areas, in cities, it is also for people living in rural areas. And here we have an excellent example from the province of Badajoz in Spain. It is the largest province, talking about the size of the province, but one of the smallest, because in the whole province, there are only 700,000 people living. The capital of the province is the city of Badajoz itself, with 100,000 people. And then there are a lot of cities and villages with 30,000, 15,000 people, 10,000. And it absolutely doesn't make sense that each of the small cities create their own smart city platform. What they did, they created a FIWARE platform for all of the cities. That one is based on, in that case, thinking cities from Telefónica, the Spanish telco company, which also has a FIWARE-based platform. And on top of the platform, they have in the meantime 29 different smart solutions for smart waste management, smart lighting, smart water, smart tourism, and so on. And each of the cities can use these platforms. And on top of the platform, the common platform, they have data analytics, they have big data. They have created a key performance indicator system, build up trust between the different cities, and are now comparing each other based on these KPIs. Where is one city doing better than the other? Where can one city learn from the other? Where can they create synergies between the cities based on this data and information? They have an open data portal for the citizens and organizations, companies, and they have dashboards for the operating people and also executive dashboards for the political decision makers to allow them to take fact-based and data-based decisions for their province and for their cities. So a very good example of how joining forces, even in rural areas, can help in the digital transformation journey. And I would now come to one other topic which drives us a bit into the direction, and I think I have some minutes left, a bit into the direction of what is in Japan the GAIA-X initiative. And we have published in June of this year a paper called FIWARE for Data Spaces, where the core part of this paper are 9 so-called technology building blocks, which are used to create interoperable data spaces. And just to give you some examples, I talked about common data models. So they are part of this building blocks, the smart data models. I talked about standard APIs, so NGSI is part of it, and the context broker, which is implementing this interface. The European blockchain services infrastructure is a very important part there, but also functionalities for data usage accounting. I mentioned that before, being able to put a price tick onto a set of data and be able to monetize data and to create the basis for the data economy. So this and in the center, in partnership with the International Data Spaces Association, the topic for a trusted exchange for data sovereignty, and here the IDS connector is playing an important role. And we joined forces last week. No, now 2 weeks ago, time is running. 2 weeks ago, we announced it on September 23rd to bring and to join forces of 4 different organizations: the Big Data Value Association from Europe, FIWARE, then an organization which was created a bit more than a year ago and is growing rapidly, called GAIA-X, and the before mentioned International Data Spaces Association. GAIA-X has the ambition to create, on the one side, a federated cloud infrastructure based on European values. Now, I talked about GDPR, for example, before, and also data spaces on top of this federated cloud infrastructure. And it was created by Germany and France. Initially, organizations from all over the world joined this initiative. And the four of us, we agreed to join forces to make the creation or to speed up the creation of data spaces based on this federated infrastructure. And this is the core picture of GAIA-X. I will not go into details of that, but wanted to show it to you. We have the infrastructure, the federated infrastructure, which is not provided just by one hyperscaler, so-called hyperscaler. It is a collaborative approach of different partners in this ecosystem. In the center, we have the so-called federation services, where there is a catalog of data which can be accessed via the data spaces, where there are the functionalities for this data sovereignty, for the sovereign data exchange. And then on top, the different data spaces, where also a smart city data space is in preparation. And talking about GAIA-X and smart cities, so smart city is one of the domains within GAIA-X in Europe. And actually, Slovenia is heading this smart city domain within the European partnership, and they are bringing this topic of smart cities also into their actual presidency role in the European Union, and we are having different conferences on this. And we will soon publish a white paper called GAIA-X and European Smart Cities and Communities white paper, which we will publish very soon. And now let me come to another example from India in this case. India has started when Prime Minister Modi was elected for the first time back in 2014 to create the so-called 100 Smart Cities program. They invested several billion, not million, billion US dollar into this initiative. The big consulting companies of this world supported the cities in creating their smart city strategy, brought first tenders to the market, supported the implementation of the first projects. And 2 years ago, the minister, the responsible minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, his name is Hardip Singh Puri. I met him, I think, the first time 3 years ago, identified that each of these cities has built its own silo, that there are only limited synergy effects between the different cities, and that the wheel has been reinvented several times using public money and public funding. And this was the start of a program called the India Urban Data Exchange Program. And sometimes you need to be at the right place at the right moment. So I was invited by the World Bank to a Smart City conference in New Delhi. And I was on a panel together with his state secretary from the ministry who is responsible for this program. And after he listened to my presentation, he said, we need to talk. I had a meeting the same night in the ministry. And since 1.5 years, the FIWARE Foundation, together with 2 of its most prominent partners, one is NEC from Japan, and the other one is a system integrator from India called Trigen. We are supporting this program to first create the architecture for an India Urban Data Exchange platform, and then did the implementation of this platform. And the new platform was published in February of this year. by the Minister Hardeep Singh Puri and his colleague who is responsible for the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology in a joint event, and they presented the new standard smart city platform for India. Not with the intention to bring it to the 100 already existing smart cities, but to the remaining 4,200 large cities in India. And this platform is open source. It is using the data models I mentioned before. So that's why IODX, India Urban Data Standards Exchange, joined our program. It is using NGSI as a standard API, and it is using FIWARE open source software building blocks. Also, other open source building blocks are in there, but it is clearly a FIWARE-driven implementation of a smart city platform for India, which is a really major success. And in June of this year, even the Bureau of Indian Standards adopted NGSI-LD as a standard API for smart cities in India. So also in India, like we saw before from ETSI, this European standardization organization, also in India, NGSI-LD is now the standard API for smart cities in India. So, and why are all these cities doing this? Because the basic software is open source, so it's free for everyone forever. We have a large open source developers community and ecosystem maintaining and further developing this open source software building blocks. And we have a large group of innovative startups and global corporates like NEC, for example, which are using this technology and providing smart solutions and platforms and services based on FIWARE. And in this combination, we are providing, as this ecosystem, the FIWARE ecosystem, where also the Smart Cities Institute in Japan belongs to, the lowest cost of ownership for the end users, so for the cities in this case. And finally, and this is maybe even more important, by providing and using standard and open data models and open APIs, we are eliminating and reducing the so-called vendor lock-in effect. So we leave the freedom of choice with whom to work together with the end users, and they are not locked in to a certain provider. Yeah, and looking at the time, this is the story of FIWARE, the open source platform technology for our smart digital future. And thank you very much for your attention. And probably there are some questions now coming from the chat or other ways. So I'm more than happy to stay with you and to have to answer some questions or to have a bit of discussion. For that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Rick, for the excellent presentation, and it's very easy to understand. Thank you very much. For many of the new audiences to this FIWARE information, probably this is a very good introductory information to share. Thank you very much. And for viewers, it's a time to ask questions, make comments to Ulrich, who is a CEO of the FIWARE Foundation. Please feel free to make any comments from chat. And Mochizuki-san, please make one comment as you are already involved in this community. All right, so in the meantime, I would like to raise some questions and talk with Ulrich, and we'll wait for comments coming in from the audiences. So this is very successful model, so to speak, not only the price standpoint, and it's a vendor lock-in free model. So, free to choose remains in the hand of the citizens and the cities, right? And then the standardization is, also a utility for common language, or, easy to interoperate the data from any of the sources. And could you talk a little bit about how you came up with this model? historical background?
Yeah, the historical background of all of this when FIWARE was created, it started in a public-private partnership of the European Commission with several, at that time, European companies, organizations, universities. It was called the Future Internet, PPP. This is, by the way, where the FI in FIWARE is coming from. So it's Future Internetware. And it started back in 2011. And 2 years after the start, the European Commission forced the members of this consortium and this partnership to publish the results of this work as open source. So it was not from the very beginning open source, but from 2013 on. And at this moment in time, some companies even left this initiative because open source was too early for them. For example, one company were the European operations of IBM. And IBM clearly changed its strategy with regards to open source. IBM 2 years ago, I think, bought Red Hat. Red Hat is one of the main companies in the open source ecosystem. So it's now part of IBM. But also companies like German Telekom or Siemens, for example, left the consortium at that time. And in total, 500 million euro were invested into the development of this ecosystem. And to bring all this investment into a sustainable future and to drive the globalization of this technology, the FIWARE Foundation was created 5 years ago. In 2016, headquartered in that case in Germany, but that was by incident. It could have been somewhere else in Europe. The main reason why finally Germany was elected is that besides the domain of smart cities, also, as I mentioned at the beginning, smart industry and Industry 4.0 is one of the application areas. And then the team who was creating the FIWARE Foundation thought, where has Industry 4.0 been invented? And that's how they came to Germany. And when they decided to go to Germany with the foundation, that was a moment when I came into this game, because I have not been part of FIWARE at the beginning. I was responsible for the business with customers from manufacturing industry with a large system integrator, and brought in my market experience into this endeavor. The FIWARE Foundation as such is an association working for the public good. So we are not doing any commercial activities. We are financed by fees of our members, like the Smart City Institute Japan is one, or also NEC is one, but also we have other organizations also from Japan who are members in the FIWARE Foundation. We were founded originally by 4 companies: Atos from France, Orange, which is the French telco company, Telefonica, which is a Spanish telco company, and the largest Italian-based system integrator and IT company, which is called Engineering Informatica. And out of these 4 founding companies, we reached now more than 420 members from all over the world. Yeah, I mentioned Red Hat before. Red Hat is a member of us, and several other organizations.
Okay, thank you very much. And next question from myself is that what's the most well-used domain of digital solutions? When you talk about smart cities, it's a multiple areas, domains.
Yeah.
Right. So automobiles, medicine, education, digital government, cashless payment, what's not. As you mentioned, it can be applicable to rural areas. So smart agriculture, smart fishery, etc., etc. So, based on your experiences, which area is like easy to adopt, maybe, low-hanging fruits for someone interested in FIWARE?
Yeah. So from the different domains which are addressed by the FIWARE technology, definitely smart cities is the most used one. Far more than 200 cities in 30 different countries globally are developing their smart city based on FIWARE technology. And looking into this domain of smart cities, topics like smart lighting are very popular because changing from traditional lights to LED lighting and then making this LED lighting even smart, that it is possible to dim down and only shine up and use more energy when the light is needed, is one topic. Then in several countries, not in all countries, but in several countries, smart parking is very important to reduce the amount of traffic searching for free parking lots. Then water management within cities is very important, fresh water management, but also wastewater management, which also brings us then in rural areas to farming, where water is used in farming. Another topic is smart waste management, to empty the waste bins only when they are full, have artificial intelligence behind it, do the route optimization for the waste trucks, and make sure that waste bins which are empty are not checked. And on the other hand, to make sure that there is always sufficient space in the waste bins to allow people to drop their stuff in there. So these are some of the, I'd say, most application domains within smart cities.
Okay, so if the Japanese cities are interested in using FIWARE, first what they should do is look into the domain area just you mentioned and find out kind of solutions already existed in the open source space somewhere, and then introduce the same code to kind of duplicate what's being already utilized in somewhere in Europe or other parts of the world.
Yeah, so there are different models to do that. One model is that cities can simply use the building blocks we are providing, which I introduced. So the open source components, the reference architectures, the APIs, the data models, and create their own solutions, or work together with partners. And I mentioned some of these partners who have done this work already before, and to simply use what's existing. And therefore we created the FIWARE Marketplace to provide an overview of which solutions are already in place, and to avoid situations like they happened in India when the wheel has been invented several times, reinvented several times, not knowing of each other. So there are different ways doing so. And I think most of the cities in Japan who are working with FIWARE at the moment are working together with partners out of our ecosystem.
Thank you very much. And let me ask you frequently asked questions in Japan. It may be some of the confusion around the understanding of the FIWARE. The people tend to ask me a question like, so what's the difference between FIWARE and X-Road? And now we are getting the GAIA-X. So are they complementary to each other? Or are they, competing to each other? Or are they, are kind of a building block of a bigger picture? Those are kind of typical questions. How do you answer to this question?
Yeah, very good question. Different answers. First of all, X-Road. X-Road is a platform created in Estonia, and it is, in the meantime, I have to calculate, more than 15 years old. Estonia is one of the most advanced digital countries in Europe. So it is really leading the ranking of the well-developed digital countries and populations. Here, X-Road can be seen a bit as a competitive architecture to FIWARE. It follows a different concept. As I said, it is architected 15 years ago, so another architecture, but also quite a good one, I have to say. And they are within Estonia very successful using this. And finally, it is one example of a data space, because a lot of different data from different areas are coming together in here, and they are also following the principle of so-called linked data, so that the data can remain where they were created, and not everything needs to be put together into one big data space. Talking about GAIA-X, GAIA-X provides an architecture and a concept of a federated cloud infrastructure, as I said before, and on top of this, data spaces which are running on this federated cloud infrastructure. And here we are providing open source building blocks to the creation of data spaces based on GAIA-X. So GAIA-X is more in the area of defining architecture, defining concepts, also driving the implementation, but using existing technologies. And here FIWARE is contributing a lot, especially with things we learned today: standard APIs, standard data models, functionalities to create data sovereignty, and also for data monetization. And these parts are becoming integral components of GAIA-X-based solutions. That would be an attempt to answer your question. Yeah, I know that it is a bit complex to understand the different organizations and the different communities now.
Yeah, in the Japanese context, the Japanese government officials first paid attention to the X-Road, because it's so famous globally, and then no one can resist watching it. So we started looking into it, and then we discovered that population registry and medical records, those sensitive information can be safely exchanged through the X-Road. So that seems to be a very interesting component, typical in X-Road. And then FIWARE is another one. People started to talk about FIWARE. Wow, Europe has started to create so-called common goods. It's not a commercial use, and anyone can use it. It's a very interesting, collaborative efforts. It looks like the FIWARE is good at exchanging the sensor-based data, like you mentioned, the lighting, or parking, mobility, not the population registry or medical record type of stuff. So it seems like some divide and conquer situation going on in Europe. The X-Road taking care of the sensitive data from the government standpoint, as opposed to FIWARE, more people-centric approach, and the citizens are, the benefited from the low price, open source software from FIWARE. Am I understanding right?
Yeah, that's right. It's I think a good positioning and description.
Okay, thank you very much. And my final question to you, and then I'll move on to the question from the audiences. India seems to be a very interesting case study. It's now FIWARE is becoming truly global with the India part of this community. And then India has been known for their own data exchange system called the India Stack. Now I was curious, they seems to have already developed its own system, but now interested in FIWARE for next generation of the smart city building. Do you know how they are managing their existing, so to speak, the data architecture and then the upcoming FIWARE architecture?
Yeah, as described before, the India stack was not too much used in the first 100 smart cities where a lot of investment was done, and out of this learnings and experiences of the first 100 smart cities, this IODX program was started, and definitely the future for Indian cities will be in this IODX, in the India Urban Data Exchange platform. And one proof of this is that the India Bureau of Standards has even standardized the API, which is the basis for this platform. So the future is definitely within IODX.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on to a question from the viewers. And the first one was from Kudo-san, Smart City Institute Japan. I will read it for you. Thank you for your great presentation. You mentioned GAIA-X as an ecosystem based on European values. Can you elaborate a little more about European values? I'm asking this question to find out if there is a similarity with Japanese values.
Yeah, I mentioned this already a bit. One of these European values is the GDPR, the General Data Protection Rules, which are relevant for personal data. So data in relation to people. But there are a lot of relevant data which are business data, which are not under the regime of GDPR. And here the topic of what we call, and I mentioned it also before, data sovereignty is very important. Data sovereignty means that an organization which has created data is able to determine and to technically enforce what another organization which gets access to the data is allowed to the data, but not only allowed, so hoping that someone is adapting to a contract, a smart contract, which was closed, but also to be able to technically enforce what this organization is able to do with the data. And this is completely different compared to big data spaces from American or Chinese hyperscalers, where we are very often paying with our data, indirectly paying with our data, not knowing what is done with our data, and even not knowing which value is created out of our data and who is earning money with our data. And this is one of the main ideas of GAIA-X, not to create or to use a monopolist handling my data and using my data and monetizing my data, but to create a federated ecosystem and to be able to give the producers of data, the owners of data, the right to use their data and to monetize and earn money with their own data. Yeah, so, and here, this is an initiative, especially GAIA-X, different than FIWARE. And maybe there's a difference. The main strategic decisions in both organizations are taken in a so-called board of directors. And within GAIA-X, it is not possible to get a seat in the board of directors for representatives of companies who do not have their headquarters in Europe. So it is not possible for Chinese, for American, but also not possible for Japanese companies to take a seat in the board of directors. Different in FIWARE, because we were convinced from the very first moment when we created the foundation 5 years ago that it is important in a digital world to globalize the ideas, the concepts, and the solutions of FIWARE, because we are a strong believer that such an approach can only be sustainable in a digital world when it is accepted and adapted on a global scale. And therefore, we opened from the very beginning our whole organizations to global companies, and therefore our board of directors now has in the highest membership level, that are our platinum members, 50% organizations from Europe and 50% organizations outside of Europe. And these Platinum members have the right to directly send one person into the board of directors. And you mentioned Yasunori Mochizuki-san, who is representing NEC in the board of directors of the FIWARE Foundation, similar as, for example, Red Hat from the US is represented in the FIWARE board of directors, and are contributing to the strategic decision of the go forward for our FIWARE global ecosystem.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as you mentioned, the data sovereignty seems to be very important, and it also echoes in Japanese values as well. We tend to emphasize free world, democracy, rules of laws, and those governing the social system itself. And then we cannot operate apart from the greater governing system, so to speak. And we tend to oppose the idea of the in near term, the large scalers or the platformers at the global scale to dominate the use of data for the commercial users, or the authoritarian use of data, our neighbors actually. And we don't want to make it a too political discussion today, but I think it's important to share ideas, also data, with those who share the most fundamental value systems in place as a first place. Thank you very much. And let's move on to comments on the question from the audience. This is from Mochizuki-san, as you just talked. Ulrich, why not share the info on next FIWARE Summit? And Nagumo-san, myself, how did you feel when you attended the FIWARE Summit some years ago? I think it was in Malaga, 3 years ago. I was attending it. And it's fascinating, actually. A lot of users are fascinated, enthusiastic, and talking about how they utilize the FIWARE to solve the issues they're faced with. And then I literally experienced the community of FIWARE really existed in Europe.
Yeah. So happy to share this. And I wasn't able to identify that this comment is from Mochizuki-san because it's in Japanese and I can't read it. So the name is in Japanese. The text is in English. Yeah, more than happy to briefly announce this. We will have our next FIWARE Global Summit. It is planned for January 19 and 20, so mid of January of next year, as a physical event, because COVID situation is improving all over the world, and we are slowly coming back to physical events. And this will be on Gran Canaria, so one of the Spanish islands close to Africa. And it is quite good reachable, and it has a very nice weather also during winter. And that is, and they are really, really active in digitization. So the Canarian Islands are very active adopters of FIWARE, and this is one of the reasons why we selected this time Gran Canaria for our summit in January of next year, 19 and 20. After having been in cities like Porto in Portugal, you mentioned Malaga, we've been in Genoa in Italy, so going around in Europe. We are not yet global enough to go with our global summit, for example, to Tokyo or to Austin in Texas. We would lose too many European partners, I think, because for some of them, such a trip will be really quite long. But what we are doing is to think about so-called FIWARE days, in addition to the FIWARE Global Summit, and have this FIWARE days on different continents. Yeah, and maybe we can think together about creating such a FIWARE day also in Japan.
Yeah, Ulrich, why don't we think together the event in Japan? I'm also a chapter representative, the Open and Agile Smart Cities So I'm always talking to Martin for collaboration. And my data is already existent in Japan. Japanese chapter is already here. And the FIWARE, it's already widely in use. So I think it's time to host an event together in Japan.
Yeah, more than welcome. And we are also in alignment with Martin to figure out what we can do together in January on Gran Canaria during the FIWARE Global Summit, implementing a memorandum of understanding we signed in June of this year, so 3 months ago, for an intensified collaboration between FIWARE and the Open and Agile Smart Cities community. And as you have seen on one of my slides, as one of the first steps out of this memorandum of understanding, OSC also joined our Smart Data Models initiative, and which is now becoming part of the MIM2. I think you are familiar with the MIMs, maybe most of the audience not. These are the so-called minimum interoperability mechanisms, which help cities to create interoperable solutions and to create replicable solutions and to be able to create synergies between them. No?
Okay, so let's keep talking about that topic. So Martin and I were talking about creating kind of a global roundtable amongst the those involved in the smart cities around the world, particularly in Europe, Asia, and India. And I think it's well aligned to what you just mentioned. And I think together with the idea of hosting an event in Japan, and then maybe January is the right timing to talk about it as well. All right.
Yeah. So I can only invite yourself, but all the audience to check on the FIWARE website for the FIWARE Global Summit, and for all of you who have the ability to travel and to join us, I would be more than happy to welcome you on Gran Canaria. But at the same time, I'm also very open to look for a dedicated event in Japan.
Thank you very much. And let's go back to a few more questions. One from Fukuda-san. Thank you very much for your great presentation. I have a question about LD. What kind of solution is most preferable, suitable for linked data?
Oh, that's a good question. Linked data, this LD, as it says, as it stands for linked data, has the idea and the background to leave data at the place where they have been created and only to create a reference to that, avoiding to bring all data together in a large data lake or in a big database. And here, especially data which create a high volume, so it's sensor data, for example, and it brings in another concept which is getting more and more popular around the world, not only to handle data in the cloud, but to integrate the so-called edge. And I'm sure you are familiar with this concept of edge computing. And this, by the way, is also one of the driving forces behind GAIA-X, knowing that today around 80% of the data operation, the data management, the data intelligence is handled in the cloud, and only 20% at the place where the data were created. So on the edge, in the different sensors, in the cars, for example. And this will turn upside down. We are convinced that within the next 5 years, this ratio of 80% cloud, 20% on the edge will turn around, just remaining 20% in the cloud, the most relevant data, and 80% on the edge, bringing intelligence to the edge level. And this concept is supported by LD, as I said, to leave data where they have been created and just have links to this.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question from Yan Wei Chen. Will FIWARE complete or complement EcoNet that have been deployed in Japan? It seems like a Japan-specific question. I'm not sure if it's a suitable question to you, Ulrich, but if you know, could you answer?
Here I have to say I am not able to answer it because I'm not familiar with EcoNet. So therefore, in this case, as I said, I'm not able to answer it.
Me either. So sorry for the situation, but maybe we'll find out some answer. All right. So Ulrich, we completed all the questions from the audiences, and time is just on time to finish. And thank you very much. Maybe you have final comments to the Japanese audience, and then we'll conclude.
Yeah. So as I said at the beginning, thank you very much for the honor to be invited to this seminar here. I really enjoyed it doing and giving the presentation. Thank you for the questions and for the very good moderation. And I also enjoyed the dialogue. Finishing with renewing my invitation to Gran Canaria, but also my offer to create a FIWARE day together with the local players in Japan, with our partners in Japan, and then hoping to see all of you in person one day at one of our global events. So thank you very much again from my side.
Yeah, thank you very much. We all are so honored to have you today. And thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the offer. We will have something to do toward the future together. Thank you.
Okay,
we conclude this webinar today.
Bye-bye. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Okay, Kudo-san, please.
So thank you very much for the great presentation today. And before we conclude, I'd just like to wrap up by introducing Smart City Institute Japan and the future webinars. So first of all, again, thank you for viewing today. And after this event, you will receive the questionnaire. So we would like you to answer. It won't take long. And also our programs will be available on Smart City Institute's Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So, and also they are also posted on our Smart City Institute Japan's website as well. And the past videos, including today, you can view on this Smart City Institute Japan YouTube channel. Today we had this, a FIWARE Foundation, webinar. And also tomorrow, it's not the Global Perspectives on Smart Cities series, but a Smart City Generation Z or Z, we are going to have a webinar in English by International Student Conference, ISC. So if you have time, please stay tuned. And also in November, as Tak mentioned a little bit, we are going to have a European Smart City Inspired Week in the week of November 8th. And we are going to invite again the FIWARE Foundation, so we will keep you updated. About Smart City Institute Japan, our members are growing, and now we have about 470 with 36 advisors. And also our global partners, including FIWARE Foundation, we are going to extend our arms to the global net areas as well. So again, thank you very much for watching today's webinar, and we hope to see you tomorrow again. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye now.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.